Welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to be exploring how to create another really useful function that you can reuse over and over again. So what this one is going to do is it's actually going to remove duplicates from an array, so any array. So first of all, let's set up an array. So we're going to call it my array, and let's give it some values here within the array. So we'll do it some string values. And we'll also, so we'll do some more string values. Then I'll add some numeric values as well. And another string. So now we need to have some duplicates. So the concept here is that we want to loop through all of the items within this array and simply get rid of any duplicates that we might have. So we've got some repetition that we're going to have here, and I want to have this a really long array with a lot of values in it. So I'm going to also add in these as another set of duplicates. So you're going to have a lot of items here within this array, and what we want to do is we want to get rid of the duplicates, and we want to create a function that can actually do that, and then output the new cleaned up array within output. So let's take care of that, and let's set up a function in order to do that. So the function can be called remove dupe. So this one will remove duplicates, and what we need to do is we need to pass in an array. So this can work dynamically using any array and looping through all of the values in the array that gets passed in to remove the duplicates, essentially removing out the duplicates from the array. And next thing that I want to do is I want to have another array. So this is going to be my array clean. So this is going to be the clean one, and this is where I'm going to pass that array into the remove duplicates. So I'm passing in my array into here, and we're going to return back within this function, we're going to return back the cleaned up version of that array. So next, let's set up our connections to our HTML so we can output it into the ID with the element with the ID of output. So document get element by ID and grab that into the output object. So now we can actually run through this, and we can update output and update the inner HTML with whatever we're getting returned back from the clean array as well as the array. So let's first output the array, and we'll concatenate together, adding in a line break there so that it's more readable, and then the other value there, so the my clean array. And basically what this is going to return back is it's going to return back the ARR. So let's try this out first. And we see that we've got both of those arrays, they both get output, they're both the same. So what we want to do is we want to clean these up, and we want to have the ability to loop through the array values and essentially remove out the duplicates. So what do we need here within this function in order to accomplish this? And these types of functions are really just super useful because you can use them within any script, just passing in any function, any array, and then cleaning it up, removing out the duplicates. So the first thing that we do need to do is we need to set up an array that we can use as a result, or this can just be C array. So this is going to be our cleaned up array that we can put the new entries into, and then ultimately what we're going to be doing is we're going to be returning back this cleaned up array instead of the ARR. So we'll set that up first and declare it so that we can make use of it within our code. So setting up that first array, and the other thing that we do need to set up is we need an object. And the reason that we need to have, so this is going to be our cleaner object or holding object. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to put the values of the array as the keys of the object, and we know that when we try to add in keys that already exist, then we don't add in any more duplicates. So this is going to be a quick and easy way to clean up the contents of the array just to make sure that we don't have any duplicates and return it back. So we're going to eventually We're putting it into an object, and then we're going to loop through it and return back all of the values from the object and then push them back into our brand new array. So let's set that up. So first thing that we need to do is set up a loop. And starting with variable x, starting out at 0, we want to loop through the entire length of the brand new array that we're using, or the array that's been passed in, and then increment x. And then this is where we're going to place it within the C object. And we're passing it in as the key, so it doesn't really matter what the value is. So this can actually be whatever. It doesn't actually matter what this value is because we're not actually going to be using this value. The important part is that we're setting up this object with whatever the contents of that particular array item are. So let's we can log that out so you can take a closer look at actually what's going to be set and what's going to be set in here. So let's go back out and refresh it and take a look in the console, and we see that as we loop through, we hit all of the items in the array, and now we're setting those up within our object. So the next thing that we need to do, and if I go out into the console, if I do C object, I can't see it because it's actually sitting into the local scope of the function. So this is important to note. So from the previous lesson that we are only using these values within the function themselves. So that's why we're not able to see it. And if we do want to see it, we can always console log that out here within our console. So this is another great use for console log because we can see that it's really useful for debugging. So let's go back out, refresh it, and now we see that we can actually see the contents of that object. So all of the values are whatever, but we see that the keys here are all the different unique values of the items in the array. So now all that's left is to loop through the object and output them and push them back into the C array. So what I want you to do now is pause the video and create this loop. So remember earlier in the earlier lessons when we're looking at objects, we saw how we can loop through all of the items within the object and we can pull out their key values. So this is what I want you to do within this line of code and then ultimately push it back into this new array that we're building. So as we loop through all of these keys like 22, 45, all the way down JavaScript hello and world, so they're actually going to get deposited and it's going to be this value that you're going to be building out and pushing into your brand new array. So go ahead, pause the video, try it out, and I'll show you the solution coming up. So I hope you had an opportunity to try this out, and this is going to be a great exercise with working with arrays and objects, and in JavaScript it's very common that you're working with both, and this is a great way to handle data, and especially it's great to be comfortable with it, especially when you're handling large amounts of data. So getting used to creating these loops and pulling out information from arrays and objects is really important to learning how to program with JavaScript. So let's set up our loop here, and I'm going to just declare another variable here. So I'm just going to call it z, and I'm going to leave this one just blank for now. And this is the one that I'm actually going to use. So I'm going to use z, and I'm going to do in so we're looking through the C object. So we're looping through so that this value, you could call it whatever you want. You could call it key as well. So this isn't really relevant within the code actually working or not. And you can also console log that out to take a closer look at what we're actually picking up in this value. So what I'll do is I'll comment this one out. and we'll refresh it, and then we'll take a closer look at what we've actually got here that we're outputting. So this is exactly what we want to output. So we see that these are the unique values that are contained within the array. So the last part of this was simply to build out this brand new array with those values that we're returning back within this variable. So let's add in the push method and add those in. And so basically, as we loop through, we're going to be building out our brand new version of the array. And when we refresh it, then we see that we do have only unique values left within the array. So we've cleaned it up and we've built out a brand new array. And this is very flexible. It can work with a whole bunch of values, or we can remove out a bunch of values so we only have a few. And you can see that as we loop through it, the second line of code here is the one that's cleaned up and all of the duplicates have been removed. So what I want you to do now is open up your editor and recreate this remove duplicates function and create yourself an array, have some duplicate values in that array, and try passing that array into the remove duplicate array and see your results. Just check out the function, make sure that it's working, that's removing out the duplicate results, and try it out for yourself. Welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to look at what happens when you declare a function within another function. So earlier we saw that when we declare a variable, and if it's sitting outside of the function, then this gets treated as a global variable, so we have access to this value within our functions and also outside of our functions. So we can call it at any point and we can access it at any point within our script. And we also saw that when we create a function, so if we have a function and we're going to call this one outside fun, so when we declare a variable within that function, we can only make use of it within the function itself. So let's give this one a value of 2000. So we've got our global, we've got our local variable, but now we're going to take this one step further, and I'm going to declare another function, and this one is going to actually sit inside of the function that I've got on the outside. So that now you see that we can actually declare functions within functions themselves. So the question is, how do we access the values within this function? So let's have something happen in here, and what I'll do is I'll increment the value of b. So this is an important thing to note, that even though I've declared the value of b outside of the scope of this function, I still have access to it because this function is sitting outside of this function, so it's sitting within the local space of it. So that's where we get access to all of the local values that are sitting in the function without having to actually redeclare them or reset up values. And of course, if this is a value that we only want to use within the inside fun, then we might be better off just to declare it within here as well. But for the purposes of this lesson, I'm going to leave it declared on the outside part, and then I'm going to access it here on the inside part. And what I want to do is I want to simply just return whatever the value of b is. So we see that we've got this function, it's the inside function, and what we're doing is we're taking the value of b and then we're just simply returning the value of b. So let's set up another variable. So I'm going to give this variable c, and this one is actually going to simply call, and so we're declaring it, and because we've got a return on the inside fun, then we're simply going to access it. And now lastly, let's log out, so a console log out whatever the value of c is. So remember, c is going to be the value of b plus 1 being returned from the inside function. So what do you think is going to happen here? What do you think I'm going to see within the value of c? Do you think I'm going to see an error, or do you think that it's going to be 2001, or do you think there's going to be some other value there? So let's refresh that. And so what's actually happening is we're not actually invoking this function yet because we're not calling for it. So this is something that we do need to do, and we need to do this outside of the function. So let's set that up. And now when we refresh it, open that up, we see that the value of b is 2001, because what's happened within the code is that we've gone through, so JavaScript has gone through, it hits this function, it knows it has to run through the code that's contained within the function called outside fun. So it runs through the code. First it grabs the value of b, and then it goes to here and it sees that value of c, and we're looking to invoke a function called inside fun. So that is sitting locally within here, and we can simply increment b, and then we're returning the value of the b, which is why c equals 2001. So what do you think happens if I try to call this function and now I'm actually outside of the function? So do you think this is going to work the same way? And if you said yes, so it works the same way as the global and local variables. So in effect, you've got functions that are local within the function, and then of course you've got functions that are global. So the same idea as the variables, you need to be at the same level in order to make use of them and make use of the values and code that's contained within there. So let's see what happens now if I don't actually return anything. So what do you think the value of c is going to be? And if you said 2002, you're correct, because this doesn't actually make any difference if we're doing something with the return value or not. All we're doing is calling this function, so it knows that when this function gets called, this code in here gets rendered out. So it works the same way whether it's a function within a function or a function outside of a function. And we can also set up the functions the same way as we saw earlier, where we can assign a value, a variable, and then build the function within that variable. So setting up the variable d, and what this does is this has got an anonymous function, so we saw this earlier, and this is going to work the same way, where we're going to take the value of b, we're going to increment it, and we can then also return back the value of b. So this is basically doing the same thing as this function. Both are going to be the same, and in order to invoke it, we can simply call to that function. So let's do d. And we can also do variable e equals d. So let's see what happens now. So refresh, and what we see that the value of c is still 2002, because we're not reusing c again. But if we want to take a look at the value of b at this point, let me show you what happens here. So what do you think the value of b is going to be? Remember, we've gone through, we initially set b, and the nice thing about having functions within other functions is that you can have these default starting points for variables. And this can actually be really useful if you don't want these values to constantly changing, if they're a variable that's sitting outside and you want to constantly have a set variable starting point, then you can do it this way. So we've got the value of b at 2000. We're running the inside fun over here, so we're incrementing it by 1. We're running inside fun again here, so incrementing it by again. Over here, we're running the function d, so we're incrementing again, and we're running the function d again, so we're incrementing it. So do you think the value of b is going to be 2004? And if you said yes, you are correct. So you're following along with how many times we've run through and we've executed code that increments b by 1. And this is another important thing to note, that even though I've got two separate functions, I can still use this variable. Even though this is locally within this function, I still have use for it in a number of different functions, and I can utilize it as much as I want, and it stays at whatever the local value is. And then once this outside fun gets run, it's destroyed and it's gone. So if I was to run outside fun multiple times, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think my value of b is going to be? So let's check that out. And if you said 2004, you're correct, because this is the whole idea of why we want to have a function within a function, because this gives us the ability to have all of them consistent and starting with the same value of 2000. So now what I want you to do is try it out for yourself and try creating a function within a function and then doing something with the local variable values that are contained within the function. So do practice, try it out for yourself. Also do maybe have multiple variables and multiple values, invoke the function multiple times, and then also make use of those local variables within additional functions being declared within that one function, and see what you can make happen using functions within functions. And it is important to get used to writing functions, and we have a whole lot more on functions coming up later on in the course, in the more advanced part of the course. Welcome back, and I have a challenge for you for this lesson. So we're going to revisit our shopping list, and this time what I want to do is I want to have a nice list here all done within the web page where we've got an input here, and whenever we type anything within the input, then we can add that value into our list. So basically it's building out all of these items that are available within the array, and then it's looping through the items that are in the array and this outputting them. So this is two separate functions. There's one function where we add the items into the array, and then the second function is to output the list. And the challenge for this as well is I want you to make this to have as little global variables as possible and have as many local variables in the functions as possible. So go ahead, pause the video, take the starting file that I have here, so I've got the HTML covered so you don't have to do anything with the HTML, and write out the JavaScript. So this is going to be two functions, two separate functions to build an array and then output that array. So go ahead, open up your editor, try it out, and I'll show you the solution coming up. So the first thing that we need for our solution is we need to create an array. So this one has to be global because we're going to be using it across two different functions. So we have no choice but to create our shopping list and keep it as a global variable. So the next thing that we needed to do is to create a function in order to add items. So we see that we've already got the onClick hooked up to a function called addItem. So we know that we need to set that function up. So let's go ahead and set up a function, and this function is called addItem. And we don't need to pass any values or anything, any arguments yet into here. So next thing that I want to do is that I want to grab this value. So I did say that we want to try to keep them as local as possible, and if we have no use for the variables outside of the function that we're using them in, then we're not going to actually have them sitting globally. So we're not going to waste our global space, and we're going to utilize all these functions locally. So let's do that, and we're going to grab the element by ID. So document get element by ID, and the element that we're grabbing is called item. And for this one, we actually get to get the value of that item. So we're going to do that all within one statement. So the next thing that we know we need to do is we've got the item value that's been entered into here, and we need to actually have it go into our shopping list array. Because right now the shopping list is empty. So let's push that value. So remember, with arrays, when we want to add an item, we simply do push. So this is a built-in function that's already built in to the array in JavaScript. So all we have to do is call to it. So this is just like any other function where we pass in an argument, and the argument that it's expecting or that's waiting for is the value that I want it to add into the array. So doing that is building up our shopping list. So now we've got our shopping list, and we're adding a bunch of items into our shopping list. So that was the first part of the challenge. The second part of the challenge was outputting that content within my HTML. So for this one, we're going to set up a separate function and we're going to simply call to it. So whenever we've added and we've updated our shopping list, we're ready to output that list and see it visible within the page. So that means that we need to set up a function called output list. And this is a global function because it's being invoked. We don't have it within the function itself. And this is also an option as well. So if you actually put output list or whatever you call it, your function that's going to output the content, if you put it within the add item, that's correct as well. And that's actually even better because then you're keeping it locally. But for now, I'm going to keep it as a separate function. But as I said, it could very well be kept within the add item function as well. So that would be correct as well to do it within that type of format. So let's set up all of our variables. And all of these variables are ones that we know we need to make use of within our function. So we need to also have that output. So let's set that one up. And notice that typically I've been setting up globally, but because I only need to have access to it within this one function, there would be no need to have it globally. So that's why it's being set up locally. So we'll just call it output, and we're going to grab that value of that element output so that we can write to it using our JavaScript. So the next thing that we want to do is, I'll set that up that we're output inner HTML, and then we're going to equal that to whatever the value of HTML is. So now we've got one other step to do. So we know that over here we've been building the shopping list, we've been set up this blank array, and as the users are adding items into the list, they're adding into the array. So we know that we've got an array with all of our items sitting in there. So let's set up and let's loop through that array. So variable x, and we'll equal that to 0, and we're gonna loop x while it's less than shopping list length. So that's how we get the length of the items in the array. And let's increment x. So now we're looping through the array. So now it's the last part is to update this HTML. So we're going to increment, add to that HTML, and I want to output it within this type of format as well. So we have a numbered type format. So we know that we've got the value of x. It did start at 0, so we need to add 1 to x. So we'll do that for the output only and not in general. Then we're adding in the dot. Then concatenating the shopping list item. So remember, this is an array. So in order to get the contents out of that array, that item, we just output it within that type of format. And then we're doing line breaks so that it's more readable. And now that looks like that's all that we have to do. So let's refresh and let's try it. So we'll do test. And we see that we're able to add in items into the list. And as we add them, they populate our array. And if you want to really clean it up, you can take that function and nest it within the function. I'm just going to use the beautify to clean up that code, and we see that now, refresh it, and everything still works the same way. Everything is still functioning and up and running. So we've just got that function. We don't have any functions actually sitting globally except for that one add item, and that function actually gets initiated from the HTML, so we can't avoid that, but we've got all of this nice and neatly packaged locally within this one function. And we know that once this function finishes, then all these variables, they don't have to sit within the global scope. So if we had a really long application, then we would be destroying all of these variables and we wouldn't have the risk of overwriting and overlapping variable names. So go ahead and try it out for yourself, and then finally, if you didn't do it all locally, make sure you make the proper adjustments to your script so that everything is sitting nice and neatly packaged locally within that one function. Welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to be looking at callbacks. So what callbacks are is they're when you're passing a function as an argument into another function, so that's a callback. So callbacks are basically passed as arguments into other functions. So let me show you an example of this. So let's set up a function first. And we're going to call this one make message. And for this one, so we're going to take a couple values here, so S1 and S2. So these are going to be just some string values that are being placed. And then also, I want to have one that's called callback. So we see that we're expecting 3 different parameters to be passed into this function. And what I want to do within the function is I want to create a brand new variable, and I want to use this third value that I've sent in here, so callback, and I'm going to pass in some arguments into this one. So I'm going to pass in these 2 values that I've got passed into me. I'm going to pass them into the callback function, and I'm going to get a result. And then at the end of it, I'm going to set up my variable here to grab that output and document get element by ID and output. So now at the end of it, this result, I'm going to do output of inner HTML, and this is going to simply equal whatever the value of result is going to be. So this is what we're going to do now is that we're going to pass in a function into callback so that we can actually do something with these 2 values that are being passed in. So right now it won't work, but we need to, so we invoke this function as we normally would, and we pass the arguments in. So the first one will be hello, the second one will be world, and then this is where it gets really interesting, because this is where we're actually going to pass in an anonymous function. So function, and this function is going to take the 2 parameters, so S1 and S2. So it doesn't actually have to be named S1 and S2, because this is just an anonymous function, and it's gonna use whatever values are being passed in here within the parameters. So it doesn't actually have to be those ones, but we are making use of those ones. So this is just what we're doing, and we're going to take those 2 values and we're going to create another variable. So this one is going to be sitting within the function. So let me give it a name of string, or maybe I'll call it result2, and this can be result1, so that we can distinguish between the 2. So they're not necessarily related because they're only being created and locally used within the functions themselves. So now let's take the value of S1, we're going to add it to S2, and then lastly we'll do something like worked or something. And then what we're doing here is we're going to return the value of result2 and try this out. So what do you think is going to happen here? What message are we going to end up getting within output? So let's refresh the page and see that we actually did get the 2 values, and they actually did get combined within the function, and we got the return value. And the usefulness of this is that we've got this anonymous function, so we can do a number of different things within this callback and have them both initiate. So it doesn't necessarily need to always be that we're concatenating S1 and S2 and worked. We can have any number of things occurring. So if, for instance, we had another one that was make message, and this time it will be John, or maybe we'll do something, we'll do JavaScript. So it'd be in line with the course topic, so JavaScript. And this time, instead of worked, we're going to do is great. So we see that we can do quite a number of different things here, and then we can even concatenate it again and do S1 and reuse the variables, and simply it's going to be returning back that result. So what do you think now is going to be happen in the output? And let's concatenate that so we can actually see them. So now we see that that second one is doing the same function, passing those same 2 parameters, and it's being invoked here within the function itself, but we're actually able to return back completely different result using those same two parameters. So this is where we've got a lot of flexibility when we're building out our functions, and we can really see how this works together. So what I want to do in the upcoming lesson is take what we've learned here in regards to how callbacks work, and we're going to update that script that we had earlier where we were adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, and we're going to update that script in order to use callbacks, which will give us a whole lot more flexibility when we're writing out our code. So if you want, open up that previous script that we had where we're adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, and try it out for yourself. See if you can shorten that script and use callbacks instead of all the different functions that we were using. And in the next lesson, I'll show you how it can be done with callbacks. That's coming up. Welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to use our script that we used before, that we developed before, where we're adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, but instead of these, we're going to use callbacks in order to do the functionality here. So let's start setting up our functions. So we've got our functions, they're already predetermined names, and we're not passing any arguments into them. So what we're actually going to be doing is we're going to be using a third function in order to accommodate and to create that callback. So we're going to be calling out to the function, and we're going to be passing those parameters into the function from the functions that get triggered from the HTML. So let's do out C. So that would be our output, our callback. So we need to pass some parameters, so A, B, and we also, so we're passing in these two values, number 1 and number 2. And then the other thing that we need to also pass in is we need to pass in the sign, because remember before we're outputting those values and we're visually outputting them. So it does make it a little bit more complicated. So we need a way to get that sign, that symbol. So this one is going to be called C or S. And then lastly, we're going to do our callback. So this is our callback function that we're going to be passing into our output C. And what output C is going to be doing, just like the last lesson, we're going to have our result. And we're going to use the passed in function. And what we're going to do is we're going to do the value of A and B, and then we're going to output whatever that value of the result is. So output inner HTML, and simply concatenate that together, and we can pass in the value of A plus, so concatenate, so it's nice space there so it's more readable, and this is where the sign or symbol that we're passing through is, and then space it out again nice and neatly, and then do a B, and again space it out, put an equal sign there, and then this is where we're going to output whatever that value for result is. So this will, within output and out C, the function out C, this is always going to look the same, and we're going to use the functions, and we're use callback in order to create different functions for CBack. So now we've got this set up, and there's one other thing that I'm going to add in, but I'm not going to add that in yet, and it's going to show you the benefit of using callbacks. So now we need to output C and set up the values of the numbers. So we know that we've got these elements as objects here, so we can simply grab those and we can say num value, and then it's num2, and same thing, value. So we're grabbing the values, and the symbol for add is going to be a plus sign, so we need to pass that in. And then lastly, let's set up our function. So our function is going to take the two parameters A and B, and then we're going to do something with those parameters. So we're going to simply return back A plus B. So to keep it nice and simple. So this is all our function is really doing, and we see what's going to happen when it calls to out C, we're going to pass in this anonymous function. It's going to take those values of A and B. So it's going to take number value 1 and number value 2. It's going to pass it into this anonymous function, and it's going to add A and B together, and it's going to return back the result. And that's where we're going to have that result. So we can try that out, and let's put in 4 and 6, add it together, and we get 46. So do you know what happened here? Do you know why we're getting 46? This is, again, when we're taking in values from the inputs, they're automatically string values. So JavaScript actually doesn't know yet to convert them into numbers. So this is where we can really make use of callback. So typically before we would have to do something like number here, and before every value we had to convert them into numbers. But things are a lot simpler now because we're passing in these two values, and for the output they can still be strings. It doesn't actually matter. It's only for the actual callback function that we need to have them as number values. So we can change them to numbers over here, but what actually makes even more sense is if I just do number here and convert A to a number and convert B to a number, and we'll try it out. So now let's refresh and do 4 and 6 again, or 4 and 5. And I'm missing a bracket there, so that's why it's not working. So let's refresh it again. So 4 and 6, and do add. And this time it's working properly. So we see that we can have large numbers, add them together, and everything works nice and smoothly. So what I want you to do now, if you haven't done this already, to pause the video and use what we've learned here and build out the other three functionalities. So the subtraction, the multiplication, and the division. And I'll show you how easy this is going to be now that we're using callbacks. So this is going to be really easy. It's going to take it's not going to take very long to copy and paste these out and build these out. So give it a try, and I'll show you how to do that coming up. So I hope you had the opportunity to try that out. And as I said, this isn't going to take very long at all because we've got all of this. We've got these dynamic functions that we're passing in here using callback. So all we need to do is we need to make sure that we hook up the right names here. So this one is MUL. So we need to do a little bit of housekeeping here to edit. So now we've hooked up all of the right function names. And the next thing that we need to do is, so this one is subtraction. So we just update the symbol there. This one is multiplication. So we can update the symbol here. And we can also pass in the X there. So that's more typically users might expect multiplication instead of the asterisk. So you're welcome to do that as well. And then the division. So now let's refresh and try out our formulas. So add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So everything works seamlessly and just as it should. So we see that now we can update the divide. So subtracts, we're not getting negative, so we're not getting large decimal place numbers there. So everything now works nice and seamlessly, and it was simply by just updating and copying and pasting and just updating this one little piece of code, we can add all of this additional functionality. So what I want you to do now is to pause the video, and I've got one more challenge for this video. I want you to add modulus. So remember modulus before where we had two numbers and we could take one number into the other number and we'd get a remainder. So what I want you to do now is to add another option for that. So pause the video and I'll show you how to do that coming up. So I hope you had the opportunity to try that out. I think it's modulus. So JavaScript modulus operator, and we're just going to update this. And now let's go down to here, and we don't actually have to update anything within our callback function. We just need to add in another function in order to accommodate that. So do mod by, and over here we'll use the percentage sign, and we'll use the percentage sign here as well. And now let's try this out. So we'll do 50. And we see that 60 modulus of 50, so this one was 50. So if we do 60 into 60, that's 0. Let's do 35, and we see that our remainder is 25. Let's do a larger number, so 58. So modulus, so 58 into 60, it goes in once, has a remainder of 2. Let's try another number, so let's try something smaller. Let's try 9. So 9 goes in probably about 6 times and has a remainder of 6, and so on. So we see that we've got that one working as well. So we've got now 5 different options of what we can do in our JavaScript function calculator. Welcome back, and in this lesson we've got an exercise for you, and this exercise is going to be dealing out a deck of cards out to any number of players. So this is determined by the user coming into your application. It's first asks you how many players, so we've got a choice. We can go all the way up to 5 players, we can go down to 1 player, so let's try 4 players. And we can see that each one of the players gets a set of cards dealt out with them. So there's 4 players that we had selected. We can select 3 players and we can deal out cards to 3 players. So this is one full deck of cards. Notice that all of the cards are unique, and we are using functions very heavily within this application in order to deliver the results here. So initially what we're going to do is we're going to use a couple of arrays, and we're going to use those kind of as our default values for the cards and set those up, and then we need to initiate several different arrays. So the first array is in order to start the dealing, so to start the game and initiate that initial dealing of the cards. So that means building out the cards, shuffling the cards, and then dealing a set of cards to each one of the players. And this can also change and fluctuate, so the application has to be dynamic enough in order to be able to build out cards to any number of players that the user's selected. So we see here we can go all the way up to 5 players, and each one gets a unique card from the deck. So this game is based around 4 major functions, and as I said, starting the game, so just initiating the game, building out that player array, and then also dealing out the cards, so looping through all of the available cards. And actually first we got to build the cards, so looping through all the defaults in order to build out all of these unique 52 cards in the deck. So we know that it starts at 2, ends at aces, and there's 4 different suits to a deck of cards. There's spades, diamonds, hearts, and clubs. And then next, we need to shuffle the cards, because once we build the deck, it's not going to be any good to us if the deck of cards is always in the same order. So we do need to shuffle the cards, and then lastly, we deal out the cards. And the way that you can look at functions is each one of them has its own set of tasks to do, and you create code in order to do those tasks. So what I want you to do now is pause the video and try it out for yourself. See if you can build out this application, and I'm going to show you the solution coming up. And as well, you can pause the video at any point while I'm providing the solution, and then take it from there and try it out for yourself in order to build out the same functionality that I have here on the right hand side. So let's begin. So the first thing that we do need to do is establish our default values here for the deck of cards. And I'm going to set up a couple arrays. So one, I've got suits, and the other one is going to be the card face. So these are the values that are on the cards. So I do need to create several suits. So I'm going to start by creating the suits up here. So we'll start with spades. Next, we're going to create hearts. And next, we're going to do clubs. And then last but not least, diamonds. And diamonds I'm going to use a short form. And the reason I'm using that is because that's going to give me the ability to output these ASC characters. So this is going to make the more visually appealing. And then I'm also going to set the colors as I build out the cards within the deck. So the next thing that we need to do is set all of the face values of the cards. So we know we can have 2s, we can have 3s, we can have 4s, we can have 5s, and going all the way up to 10. And then after that, we need to build out the jack, the queen, the king, and the ace. So let's build those out. So those are jacks, queens, kings, and lastly ace. So you can also put the ace first if you want it to assign values to them, but that's actually not going to be one of the requirements here. So you can do it actually in any order that you want, as long as you get all 13 different faces for the cards. So the next thing that I want to do is set up some default arrays. Now these arrays are going to have to be global because we're going to need to access them from the different functions. And we are building out 4 different functions to accommodate all of the tasks we need in order to run this application. So the other thing that we need is we're going to build out the deck of cards within the cards array. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to have a place to hold the cards for the players. So we're simulating this as much as possible within real life, where we're actually going to be dealing the cards. So when we create the deck, we're going to be taking the cards out of the deck and placing them within the players' arrays. And then we can loop through the players and output the results. So that's what we see here on the right-hand side. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to initiate the game. So see here that we've got deal, and when you look into the HTML, we've got a function called start deal. So let's set that up first, because that's the first function that we encounter, and essentially this is the one that's going to control all the other functions and the order the functions are going to get invoked. So the first thing that we need to do is I want to actually clear out players. So I want to make sure that I'm starting out with a completely blank array. And so what this will do is this will clear out the arrays. So just in case I have already dealt out a set of cards and I want to deal out another fresh set of cards, I don't want any lingering values within players or cards. And that's where I'm just doing that, where I'm just making sure that they're nice and empty. So next, what I want to do is actually build out this player's array. So I want to have a multi-dimensional array. And if you remember, multi-dimensional arrays, they kind of look like this. So you could initiate the array within this type of format. So what we're going to do, actually, we're going to make it a little bit more dynamic. So we're not going to create any length for there that's not necessary within our initial scope. So what we need to do is we need to grab the value that's held here within the number of players. So let's go ahead and we're going to grab that. So we're going to do that locally because we're not actually going to need this value outside of the scope of this particular function. So next, let's do number and document get element by ID. And this is where we're going to grab the value that's contained within players. So that's this value here, that input value there that we have. So we're grabbing that, and what we need to return back from there is the value. So basically, we're going to get is a numeric format under num, whatever value is contained within here. So the next thing that we need to do is let's build the cards. So we can build the deck of cards, and this is going to be a function to build the cards. And next function, we need to shuffle the cards. And then the last function is going to be to deal the cards. So now that we've established this, I want you to, again, if you haven't already, pause the video and try it out for yourself. Build out this function to build the deck of cards. build out the function to shuffle the cards. So what this is going to be doing is this is going to randomize our array, and our array is going to be contained within cards. So we can just pass that through, and we're going to shuffle them and then return back that newly shuffled deck of cards. And then lastly, we want it to deal out the cards. And over here, again, I'll pass in that array for the cards themselves. And now I want you to try it out for yourself. So we know that we need to set up several functions. So the first one is build cards. So we'll set that one up. The next one is going to be a function to shuffle cards, and I'll give you a clue. This is going to be just that randomizing of the array values. And then next we need to just deal out the cards. So that's actually going to deal the deck of cards out to the users. So go ahead and try to fill out these functions, and I'll show you the solution coming up.